Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, joined as, by always, one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Michael. I'm doing really good tonight.
Oh, I love to hear that. Hey, you know why I'm in a great mood tonight is because we got a special guest with us, Ben Jones from StateCollege.com. Ben, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Actually, the Sixers are getting worked by the Heat right now, so I'm a little less than perfect, but otherwise I got no complaints.
Yeah, that game's ugly.
Oh, well, before we get into this now, Geoffrey, is that would that be your de facto NBA team, just the one Pennsylvania squad?
Oh no, nope, don't like the Sixers.
Okay,
I was an Allen Iverson fan. Was always an Iverson fan, but yeah, not a Sixers fan.
That's fair.
We can get into that more later, I guess. But the topic of hand tonight, we're breaking down Steelers' second-round pick, Pat Freiermuth, and I hope I'm saying that right because that's a bit of a mouthful, a whole lot of vowels, but we'll work on it. We'll get that down, Pat. Ben, specifically, does Pat Freiermuth live up to his baby Gronk moniker? Is that kind of a ridiculous statement to be throwing his way already?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. I think the fact that he's from that sort of New England neck of the woods made it easy for people to make that comparison as he started to rise up the recruiting ranks and kind of have his athleticism. I actually remember seeing him at a football camp that Penn State had hosted many years ago at this point and being impressed by sort of his athleticism at that age. Is he Gronk? There's only one Gronk, but in terms of some of the calling cards that they both kind of have as players, I think it's not an unfair comparison. It's just sort of a high standard to hold a kid to, in college. And then, obviously when you're going into the NFL, trying to make a name for yourself.
So what area of his game do you think you would be safe calling the most Gronk-like? What part of his game?
I think he just has really consistent hands. I mean, there's obviously a lot of things that Gronk does and has done really well in terms of his athleticism and, the ability to shed tackles and what have you. But I think the biggest thing that Penn State got out of Pat the last couple of years, not so much last year when he was dealing with injuries, but over the course of his career, was he was just really reliable. And I think we've seen, over the course of Gronk's career that, when Tom Brady needs someone to throw it to, you need someone who has to make that catch. Obviously Gronk is not a receiver in the positional sense, but in terms of a guy that can really make a catch every time you need it, I think Pat really throughout his career was consistently able to bring down, pretty much everything that was thrown his way. And for a little while there, that was a big issue for Penn State that they didn't have a guy, especially early in his career, that was quite as consistent as he was. So I think he really made a name for himself in the offense, sort of being able to be reliable pretty much every single snap. So I think if you're going to compare just sort of what you get out of him right away that might be comparable to Gronk, I think it's the fact that, he's going to be there, and more often than not, he's going to make that catch that you need him to make.
In that, you mentioned his health, which we saw he had a shoulder surgery of some sorts a season ago. I don't believe I actually saw which operation he went under, whether it was a labrum or a rotator cuff, what have you. But do you expect him to be 100% healthy in I guess the coming weeks here as we get into mini camp, I guess this weekend, and then training camp a couple months from now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot more than you do, but my impression from, when he worked out at Pro Day, or rather when he didn't work out at Pro Day, was that really he was just a few weeks from being able to do some of those lifts and some of the runs and everything. I mean, I think it's worth noting, obviously post-op is always a different sort of process, but I think the fact that he played a little bit last year through that injury. So the fact that he was able to play, even though he was injured, and then, sort of decided once Penn State's season went downhill to get the surgery and kind of make sure that he was healthy for the next step. So I would anticipate that he is healthy for all the important things that are coming up down the road for the Steelers and everybody else. But obviously, things change, and he's not texting me every time he wakes up feeling a little sore. So, but I imagine he should be healthy and good to go.
For him, with the time he's missed and all this stuff, how ready do you think he is, week one, like training camp, preseason, week one of the NFL season? How ready is he to be a weapon in the NFL?
I think he's pretty ready. I mean, he's a big guy. He's got a big physical body. He's not really, sometimes you see guys that make a lot of plays in college and you go, well, the competition and the size and everything, you wonder if that translates. But I think, there was I guess it was the Cotton Bowl. He had a really big hit down the field where he just bowled this guy over and just sort of went right through him. I don't think that, obviously coming off an injury, there's always that sort of recovery time where you get everything, your cardio and everything back underneath you. But I think in terms of like the intellect, in terms of his physical stature right now, I don't think there's any question that he's going to be a guy that's going to be able, a lot like Mike Gesicki, he gets compared to, the predecessor for him at Penn State now in Miami. I think Mike was able to, produce right away, and I don't see particularly any reason outside of, being 100% that Pat wouldn't be able to do the same.
When it comes to tight ends, really, you've kind of seen a transition in the league now where they're more like just really big receivers. Is that fair to call Freiermuth a player like that, or is he someone that's more of a blocker or that receiving type, or is he just kind of an all-around tight end that is kind of getting away from this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's more of an all-around guy. I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, in today's game, you've got to be more athletic and you've got to be reliable in the passing game to be an effective tight end. But I think the one thing that Mike Gesicki didn't do as well at Penn State that Pat has done a better job or did a better job with was his blocking. So he's a guy that, can stand in the pocket, so to speak, and pick up a linebacker, pick up a corner, or whoever's coming around the edge. And he did that pretty consistently. He got better at his run blocking as his career went along. But obviously, sort of his bread and butter, or at least, sort of what has gotten him to this point in his career is the ability to make plays down the field. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Mike Gesicki in terms of Mike was a former basketball player that could really high point balls and kind of go up and just beat three other guys to a ball. That's never really been Pat's thing. But if you get it to him, he's going to catch it. And, obviously you just tailor your passes and the plays and the designs around what he's good at. And I think the big thing for him is just if he can get his hands on it, he's going to catch it. So he's definitely an all-around guy, but I think you're right. As the tight end position becomes more and more receiver heavy, there's no doubt that, that this is something that he is good at as well.
So do you consider him more of a good blocker who can also catch the ball, or is he a receiving tight end who can also block? Like, which side of that would he fall on in the more balanced category?
I mean, I would say he's a receiving tight end that can block. I mean, he had his second year at Penn State, I think he had 43 receptions. You can fact check me on that, but it was, he's been a 20 plus, 30 plus guy when he's healthy. In terms of receptions, they relied on him a lot in the passing game. He was a good safety valve. He made a lot of plays. He's hard to bring down. So I think that, obviously the blocking is a bigger part of his game than it was for some of the guys that came before him. But I do consider him to be more of a pass catcher that can also block rather than a blocker that happens to catch passes.
When we were kind of traversing the pre-draft process, well before the Steelers drafted Pat, he was often compared to actually Heath Miller, oddly enough. Do you agree with that kind of comparison? And is that the kind of guy that we should kind of see the same sort of replication here in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, even, not even as I'm not a Steelers fan myself, but living in Pennsylvania, I think anyone that watches the NFL knows sort of Heath Miller's kind of reputation in the state in terms of being a tough guy, in terms of being reliable and durable. I think that, that's a fair comparison to make. It's sort of a high bar to ask a guy to meet, especially with, sort of how, not to speak for Pittsburgh fans, but, sort of the regard that people hold him with in terms of that fan base. You guys would know that better than me. But I do think that there's a good comparison to be made there in terms of the physicality, in terms of the not being afraid to take a hit. I do think he is a good balance between that transition between a guy that, is giving up toughness for the offensive ability. Sometimes, a guy can make great catches, but he's not a big fan of lowering his shoulder necessarily. And I think that he has the ability to kind of fit that Heath Miller, mold as I understand it, to be able to make plays, but also not really shying away from the contact that, made him so beloved.
One thing Heath Miller was fantastic at was play action, because he was such a good blocker and also such a good, reliable receiver and smart with his spacing. I noticed just when I was doing a film room on Pat Freiermuth, I don't watch a lot of Penn State, but I noticed in there that a lot of his plays where he's getting the ball, Penn State's running a ton of play action. Is that kind of the offense Penn State runs and he kind of fits into it? Or is that like something they ran knowing that he was going to be really a weapon in play action?
Yeah, I mean, Penn State has run, the sort of RPO offense probably since 2016 or so. So it's more of he fits into that puzzle, I think, a little bit. But there are definitely circumstances where, you would see, Pat stay back in protection and then kind of slip out into the seam and make some, great plays in that kind of 10 to 15 yards down the field area where he kind of finds the space between the safeties and the linebackers and kind of makes a home for himself, if you will. So I do think that it's a little bit of both. But again, I mean, I think it comes back to you got to kind of be good at both things. And I think play action, if you're a guy that can block and if you're a guy that can get down the field, you kind of fit that play action mold there, because obviously you're going to have to contain some guys as that play develops. So I do think it fits well for him. But honestly, I think unless you're asking him to run a 440, there's not a lot that Pat can't do.
When you watch Pat Freiermuth's highlight tape, especially, it instantly jumps off paper that he loves to run people over as soon as the ball's in his hands. Is he the kind of guy that's going to be having weekly pancake blocks, those trucking type runs? Is he like that bully on the field, or is that more something that just kind of breaks out every now and then, mainly against smaller competition, or is he really that guy?
I mean, I think he can be that guy. I mean, I think that physicality is always something that kind of develops over the course of the career and sort of you continue to get better at. I think that he did a good job becoming that physical guy as his career went along. The sort of interesting thing was, lots of Penn State fans and, those of us that covered the team were used to him hitting people. And then when he got hurt, the two tight ends behind him came in and started hitting people even harder. So I don't know what they're putting in the milk and cereal in the Lash building, but the tight ends have started to take people's heads off. Not literally, because that's targeting, but that's beside the point. But yeah,
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's a completely different conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think he is a guy that he doesn't shy away from contact. He's going to knock people on their butts. He's going to, make people earn their tackles. Obviously you've got to pick your spots. You got to be durable. You don't want to, bite off more than you can chew. But I do think that he is a guy that is not afraid of that contact. And you will probably see as he continues to develop, some of those highlights that happen away from the ball where you realize that, he drove a guy 10 yards down the field, or he knocked a linebacker, back a couple yards when he came in on a blitz and picked it up. So I definitely think he has that in his bag, so to speak.
Now, with his physical play, did Pat have any problems with drawing penalties, either, offensive pass interference or roughness penalties? Was there many penalties for him?
Not that I recall. I mean, I think anybody that gets the ball thrown at him as much as he did is going to pick up an offensive pass interference here or there. But no, I mean, I think there's a big difference between being physical and being, over that line, that hypothetical line where you're a detriment. I just think he's a tough kid. He's always been a dependable blocker. And, like I've said a couple times here, he's good at shedding tackles down the field. But in terms of penalties or anything like that, Penn State's in general done a pretty good job the last couple of years of not drawing penalties, and he was certainly a part of that.
When you look at kind of the hierarchy of NFL tight ends right now, clearly Travis Kelce and George Kittle rather stand above the rest. Is he someone with potential that's that high? Like, we know Kyle Pitts obviously was at the top of the draft class. He's kind of destined to be the next guy, but does Freiermuth kind of have that potential to actually become someone that you look at maybe a couple years down the road saying like, oh, this guy's like a top 5 tight end in this league?
I think from a consistency standpoint, yeah. I mean, I think he has a ways to go to become that guy in terms of the sort of surprising athleticism that some of those guys have, that they really fill that hybrid role of receiver and tight end. But I think the thing that Pat will really make his money with is just the ability to be consistent. And that, to a certain extent, is a thing that will make you one of the best tight ends in the league. I think about, as an Eagles fan, Zach Ertz couldn't shed a tackle to save his life, but he could make 1 million catches every game and be really consistent. And I think a lot of people, especially when he was very good, thought of Zach Ertz as one of the better, at least, tight ends in the league. And he wasn't necessarily a guy that was going to do these spectacular things, but he was consistent every single game and he was there to make the catches. So, I don't think Pat is necessarily flashy, but, it's one of those things. Do you want a flashy guy, or do you want a guy who's going to make 85% of his catches? And, at the end of the day, you probably take somewhere in between, but I think that certainly from a consistency and a toughness and kind of all around skill set standpoint, there's no reason that it can't. And I think, you talk about, sort of his hype. I would have had him last year if he had been healthy and the pandemic hadn't been going on and everything had been a little bit more normal. I would have had him probably top 4 tight ends in the country if he was healthy going into last year and everything was a little bit more normal. So I think, the injury and the oddity of Penn State's season might have bumped him down the charts a little bit, and the excitement level that comes with a guy who's got a shoulder injury and no one's watching him play, and Penn State's not very good, so no one's watching them play to begin with. But I think in terms of what he can be, he has the skill to be as good as anybody for the most part.
One of the things we talked about internally after the Steelers drafted him, and we're all looking up scouting reports, we're all looking at reactions, everything, is there was a lot of disagreement over his hands. Like, you would have some reports talk about like how consistent he was and how good of a receiver he was, and then you'd have someone else talk about like he drops way too many passes. Is there any validity to that? Because I watched like 4 games of his, I didn't see any drops. Is that something that showed up with his injuries? Is that a problem that, that is there, where there's some things he needs to work on, or is that kind of just crazy talk?
I mean, you get the ball thrown at you, you're not going to catch every single one. So, there's some of this where you go, well, sure. Did Pat ever record a drop? Well, yeah. But I mean, I think in general, last year I think is a good example. He only played in 4 games and he had 23 catches, and you don't end up with 23 catches in 4 games, especially with their offense that was kind of struggling to stay on the field, quite frankly. So I think that's a sign of consistency, because 23 catches means you're getting at least 23 targets, and you don't get that many targets over 4 games if you're dropping the ball. I thought he was outstanding his sophomore year. His freshman year, he was good. So, yeah, I mean, I've always thought of Pat as a consistent guy. You could probably find drops. You could probably find passes he'd like to have back. But, I'm sure that you could probably say that about just about everybody.
To play devil's advocate here for a moment, when you watch him play, what's the one thing that kind of stands out the most that you think, okay, he needs to work on this to really take that next step?
I mean, I think for me, and this is an analogy or a comparison that will work well for you guys, is that Pat reminds me of a slightly more athletic version of Jesse James, as a guy that I also saw at Penn State. And Jesse was not always the fastest. He wasn't always the most explosive. And, I won't bring up any goal line related PTSD for you, but, there's, but I think that's an apt comparison, because Mike Gesicki really set the bar high for Pat, I think, as a really athletic, really high point kind of guy. And Pat just isn't that kind of player. He's consistent. He's physical. He's going to make the plays and make the catches and be reliable. So, if there's anything that he has to work on, it's just sort of that, the athleticism from the standpoint of being that guy that you can throw it into a crowd of 2 guys or 3 guys and he's going to come down with it. But, that I think that's something that pretty much anybody that's not one of the top 3 tight ends in the game right now have to work on. So I don't really look at him as a guy that has a major glaring weakness. Obviously, when you play in the NFL, you're playing against the best football players in the world. So you're going to have guys that are going to make you have to get better. I think any tight end that comes out of college can get better at blocking. I think any tight end that comes out of college can get stronger and tougher. But, I think Mike, to go back to him, because he's the comparison that I always make in my head, Mike was not a particularly good blocker. He had to work on that in the NFL, and he has. I don't look at Jesse as having, or not Jesse, excuse me. I don't look at Pat as having this obvious thing that he has to get better at. I just think he can get better at everything.
You mentioned his production in only the 4 games in 2020, where his production like leaped up. He had over 300 yards, I think, in those 4 games. Was that just an increasing role in the offense because he needed a bigger part because people had left? Was that, you think, because of growth in his own game, or is that just a small sample size where he happened to have a couple of really big games?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, he was a pretty consistent presence on the offense his sophomore year, but the thing that kind of contextualizes it for last year is Penn State was going to be a running team. 2 of their running backs got hurt, or one of them got hurt. The other one had a medical retirement before the season started, and they were considered to be 2 of the better running backs that were going to be in the Big Ten. So Penn State had to go to the passing game a lot more. KJ Hamler, who's in Denver now, was no longer a part of the team because he was in the NFL. So Penn State was starting Parker Washington as a freshman at receiver. They were starting Keandre Lambert-Smith at receiver, who was a freshman. They had Jahan Dotson at receiver, who turned out to be very, very good, but nobody really knew how good he was going to be at the time. So I think Pat was the obvious answer to, we have to make 10 yards right now, and we're going to throw it. Who do we throw it to? So I think, certainly he got better. But I think when you looked at Penn State's offense last year, between the injuries, between the departures, he was sort of the obvious choice. And I think, to his credit, he was pretty consistent through those 4 games, give or take play here or there.
When it comes to size, especially in the red zone, you look at the Steelers lineup there's a bunch of guys over 6'4". Of course, Pat Freiermuth himself is standing over 6'5". Is he a guy that's going to win a bunch of jump balls and kind of be a demon in that red zone type area, goal line type situations?
Yeah, I actually think that that's one of the areas. I know that I had said that his sort of downfield, high pointing ball skills aren't as flashy as some of the guys that have come before him, but I think, I look back when Penn State played Ohio State 2 years ago in State College. He had a really nice red zone touchdown, or 3 years ago, I guess it doesn't matter. He basically posted the guy up in the red zone, in the end zone, and just kind of out physicaled him for the ball. And I think that's a good example of kind of what he can do, that maybe he's not going to be a guy that you're going to throw it to 40 yards down the field so he can jump up and get it. But I do think from a matchup standpoint, when you have that kind of size and physicality, that you can, if you've got good leverage on the guy that's covering you, he's definitely there to kind of go up and get that ball. And that's something that Penn State had done a fair amount with him in the red zone over the course of his career.
Now, Pat Freiermuth played all over as a tight end. Like, they spread him out wide. They put him in the slot. He was in line. He played H-back, lined up as a fullback even a couple of times. Where do you think his best usage is? Does he have a best usage, or is he best used when he's moving around and doing different things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the versatility that makes him a good tight end, is that you can kind of put him in a lot of different places. I mean, you're right, now that I'm thinking about it, he was kind of all over the place. You could almost put him in that sort of, I mean, he's not a slot receiver by any stretch. I'm not pretending that that's the case, but I do think that when you kind of break him out wide, he can be a matchup issue. When you keep him in, he can be a matchup issue if he kind of releases a little bit later into that secondary area. So yeah, I don't know if there's a place that you would say would be absolutely the best option, but I think having a guy that's versatile and doesn't have to be sort of blocked into, this is the thing that I am good at, I think gives you an advantage in that situation, because you can move him around. And it doesn't become window dressing to say, oh, he's out wide, they're not going to throw it to him, or, oh, he's, inside, he's vulnerable to, get blown up on the block. So I think he can do a little bit of both, and I think he can succeed at a little bit of both.
Sometimes when you watch a tight end play, especially when they're playing beside a tackle with their hand in the dirt, they kind of look a little awkward in a three-point stance. Is Freiermuth someone that can play with his hand in the ground, or is he someone that should strictly be used as someone stand up in a two-point stance?
I mean, he stood up a whole lot more at Penn State. I think that's just a function of how they used him. So I don't think I've seen him in a three-point stance a whole lot, just because that's not really the kind of offense that Penn State was running. But I imagine that, if he practices it, he's a smart kid. I think that's one of the things that we haven't really touched on is he's not a meatheady kind of guy that is operating with minimal brain waves at any given moment. I mean, he's a smart kid. He's coachable. He likes learning, and he got better over the course of his career because he really wanted to. So, I don't really know how necessarily good he would be in that sort of make him a lineman, put him in a 3-point stance sort of thing, because he stood up a lot. But I think that he has all the traits to kind of, if that's how you want to use him, he'll be quick to figure that out.
So going past his just on the field play, what was his reputation like around, reporters that had to interact with him in the Penn State, campus community and with his teammates? How was he viewed as a person?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of those guys that, when, people in the locker room, when he spoke, they listened. He was always good with the media. He was always, insightful and as honest as you can be. I think the one thing, with guys coming up in college is, especially with Penn State, which there's a ton of people like me that cover the program, that's really the first time that some of these kids have had 30 people with a microphone in their face. And, that takes a little bit of adjustment sometimes, but I always thought Pat kind of took to it naturally. I thought he was, he didn't always say a lot, but what he said always carried weight. And I think sometimes that's the best kind of player that you can be. Obviously, everybody's locker room demeanor is different, and I'm not in a locker room right now to say how it should or shouldn't be. But I think that, he was active in Thon, which is a cancer-related fundraiser at Penn State. He, always took the time to be friendly with fans. He was always friendly with the media. So, yeah, I can't say, really any bad things about, Pat Freiermuth in terms of the guy himself.
Last question for me here. I'm curious whether or not you think Pat Freiermuth is someone that could play on special teams, especially if he's seen more as a backup in year one here. Is he someone that could cover kicks, or would he have any success as someone that could be a blocker in return teams?
Yeah, I think he can. I mean, I think he's athletic enough that you can put him out in that kind of position to go hit somebody or go get down the field in quick order. He didn't really do that at Penn State, just because he was too important to get run over by some guy that just wanted to take your head off on special teams kind of deal. But I think that, between his athleticism and size and speed and what have you, there's no reason that he couldn't. And I think he's really kind of going back to the sort of person that he is. I think, if Mike Tomlin says tomorrow, look, you're not going to be the primary tight end this year. You're not going to get a ton of snaps on offense, but we want to get you out there on special teams. I don't think that he's going to be the kind of guy that, pushes back on that. If he needs to do something to help the team, he's going to do it. So I think, that in and of itself will make him successful at it.
Awesome. Geoffrey, do you have anything else?
Yeah. Is there anything that comes to mind to you that maybe we haven't covered that stands out about Pat Freiermuth?
What are his deepest and darkest secrets? I mean, I just think he's a good kid. I think that, you go back to the question of, is he going to be, a top 5 tight end in the league? It's hard to say. Careers go all sorts of different directions, and guys that you didn't expect to be super, super good end up being good, and guys that come in with a ton of hype maybe don't live up to it. But I think that the common denominator, he reminds me a lot of Saquon Barkley, who obviously, despite perhaps your best wishes, doesn't play for Pittsburgh, but he is an exceptionally good kid. That I remember meeting Saquon when he came to Penn State, and he was the same guy then that he is the last time I saw him about a year ago. And I think Pat obviously is not quite as heralded as Saquon, but to watch his career go from the guy that nobody really knew to, one of the most recognizable faces on Penn State's campus, he never really changed. And I think that in and of itself is a hallmark of a guy that's going to be able to be successful in the league for a long time. So is he top 5? I don't know, but I think he's a good kid. And I think that goes a long way towards, trying your best to become a top 5 guy.
Awesome stuff. Ben, before we let you go, is there anything you want to plug on your way out?
Go Birds. But I mean, you can
wah, wah.
And then suddenly the feed cuts off. No, I mean, if anybody that's watching likes Penn State athletics, I cover it at statecollege.com. You can follow me on Twitter, but otherwise, I'm just glad the Eagles don't have to play the Steelers this year because they're probably going to suck again. So I'll take it.
Now I kind of wish they were playing the Eagles again. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's Ben Jones from State College. So thank you so much, Ben.
Yep. Thanks for having me, fellas.
Thanks.
For everyone that is listening on the podcast platform side, you can flip over to part 2 now. Geoffrey and I will continue along with some Pat Freiermuth talk and some other Steelers-related notes. News every minute, not really, but at the time of the year, still some exciting stuff popping up. So make sure you flip over to part 2 now. If you're on YouTube and Facebook, just hang tight. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Curtain Call Podcast, Part 2. Once again, my name is Michael Beck, joined as always by Geoffrey Benedict. Tonight's topic was on one Mr. Pat Freiermuth. We've had a couple weeks to digest the pick now. Geoffrey, what do you think of this kid in general?
I like the pick. I agree with some of the other commentary we've had on the site. People talking about how the Steelers knew they had to go, early and get a tight end if they were going to get one, and it makes sense. And I think he really is going to fit well in Matt Canada's offense, especially like the guy was saying, he can play anywhere. You can use him in any position, and he's going to be reliable and he's going to be solid. So that versatility, flexibility is often its own benefit. So I think he's going to be a really good addition.
Depending on who you ask, you could arguably say Kyle Pitts is just a really big wide receiver. Heck, he'll even do that when it comes contract time so he can get paid more money. He'll call himself a wide receiver. So from all that being said, I guess you could kind of say Freiermuth was the top true tight end in this draft class. So it's understandable why the Steelers would go out and get a guy like that. But with his addition, do you think it's like in year one, could he bench Eric Ebron? Could he be the Steelers tight end one?
I would like to see him split snaps with Ebron. I've talked before. I think Ebron was a lot better early in the season, and I think he's a lot better when he has a lower snap count and less blocking responsibility. He's just, his body, he was worn out by the end. Like you could tell, he wasn't the same guy end of the season. So I think you'll get more out of Ebron if Pat Freiermuth is playing more. So I expect him to play a lot right from the start. And Matt Canada's offense often uses 2 tight ends. If people remember back, even Randy Fichtner in 2018, one of the best parts of that offense in 2018 was using both tight ends. Both the tight ends had a high yards per target. They were getting targeted downfield. And that was James Conner going to the Pro Bowl. So if they want, if you want Najee Harris to be worth that number 1 pick and to have a good season, tight end usage, 2 tight ends, and both of them being able to catch passes, that's a good way to go about it.
Now, with Eric Ebron specifically, just to stay on the tight end talk, do you think he could get another contract from the Steelers next year, or is this complete transitionary period to Pat taking over full-time next year?
I think it's possible. It's going to depend on what he does this season, how much he wants. I don't think they're going to pay Ebron. Like, it's not a case where he's going to get paid. He got a deal. He came to Pittsburgh because his market value was down. If his market value bounces back up, say he has a really good season, him and Freiermuth both, and all of a sudden you see Eric Ebron at like 8 to 9 yards per target and, catching touchdowns, then no, he's gone. They're not going to actually pay him.
What do you think of the Heath Miller comp to Freiermuth?
I think I agree with our guest in the reliability category. I think that works. Heath Miller was an absolute beast on play action, and from what I've seen on film, Pat Freiermuth is an absolute beast on play action for different reasons. Heath would start blocking somebody, and it's he was such a nightmarish blocker that he could go. You'd think you'd beat him, and he slipped past you. Pat Freiermuth is a beast on play action because his first 5 yard speed right off the snap is so good that the linebackers have no time to drop deep. He's in that gap between the safeties and the linebackers so fast, and that's where he does his damage. So to me, in that regard, his reliability and being an absolute monster to deal with in play action, I think he compares to Heath Miller, and that's it. Like Heath was a absolute stud blocker. George Kittle is the only tight end left in the NFL that can actually catch a ball and block like Heath Miller did. Like, that's it. There's just aren't guys like that anymore.
Hey, this is the first time, too, in a very long time the Steelers have invested high draft capital at the tight end position. Like, if you were to just take that one Heath Miller pick out of the pitcher and keep going further back, you're well into the 90s for, like, the last time a second-round pick was a tight end. Like, it's crazy, like, the amount of time it's taken for the Steelers to invest in the position. Do you think it's possible that this guy could retire as like this statistical all-time leader in these tight end stats for the Steelers? Because when you look at it, even Heath Miller wasn't throwing the ball all that much. The Steelers really didn't, in my opinion, I think Heath Miller could have had a career that was greater than Jason Witten's. In my 100% opinion, that's how I kind of feel about it. And because the Steelers didn't use him quite enough, the stats just weren't there. Because of that, it kind of leaves the door wide open when you have a very talented guy like Pat Freiermuth coming in. Do you think it's possible if he has like a healthy 10-year run that he could be the Steelers' number one guy in those record books?
Absolutely. I absolutely think that's really possible. Ben Roethlisberger is especially for most of Heath Miller's career, Ben could throw it to Santonio Holmes. Ben could throw it to Mike Wallace. Ben could throw it to Antonio Brown, or he could throw it to Heath Miller. It wasn't going to be Heath all that often. And even as much as Ben Roethlisberger valued Heath Miller, he just wasn't that guy that you're going to target. He's not the guy you want to throw on. He's the guy you have if the other stuff doesn't work out, right? And Ben Roethlisberger, especially early in his career, was much more likely to, break a tackle than settle for a check down. Like he'll throw a defensive end off of him and go back to his number one receiver rather than check the ball down to a tight end. So I think Pat Freiermuth definitely has an opening there, and especially if he establishes himself and then you see a rookie or a younger quarterback come in and he can be that security blanket. And in Matt Canada's offense, tight ends get a lot of action. They are moving around. They're doing stuff with his stuff. He could be a real star in Matt Canada's offense.
Yeah, I will say, if you're a big fantasy football fan and you're in like one of those dynasty leagues that you keep players, the Steelers draft a quarterback next year, I got a feeling Freiermuth's stats will be ridiculous in year two. I think he could get a ton of targets. So maybe stash him on the bench if you're one of those fans. But if you're a Steelers fan, of course, you're here. We all love the Steelers. But he's a guy I'm definitely keeping an eye on for the foreseeable future. Far past year one, I think the Steelers got someone here. But to kind of transition to the news of the week, I suppose, and the reason why we're here on a Thursday night is because three dudes thought they were more important than us and needed the Wednesday night slot to talk about the schedule release. First of all, kind of rude. I feel like we could have done a bang-up job on the schedule release, but whatever. It's okay. My feelings aren't hurt that much. They will recover. But what are your kind of initial reactions on the brand new schedule coming out yesterday?
See, Mike, I hate to break it to you, we would not have done a great job because here's my thoughts on the schedule. I don't care.
Okay, we're on the same page then.
I'm that guy who's like, you know what? It's interesting to me to see when the games are because I guess if you're scheduling trips or something, you want to know when the home games are, when the away games are, when they're going different places. But for me, no, I don't care about the schedule. Like that was my favorite quote last year of Mike Tomlin when they were asking him about games in the bye week, and he's like, "We don't care." I loved it. I still love it. And for me, yeah, we already knew it was going to be a tough schedule. We knew who was going to be at home. We knew all that. We knew who they were playing. So for me, the schedule release isn't a big deal.
Yeah, I will say why I don't like that Mike Tomlin clip of him saying we don't care. It's because people love to tag you in that clip. It's like, we get it. Yeah, we don't care. Awesome. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
You get that a lot, don't you?
It's kind of the natural reaction anytime I say anything. It's more like, Mike, nobody cares.
Yeah. But for actual thoughts on it, I found it I liked it. There's not a lot of really bad stretches of travel, which always stand out to me when it's like, okay, this week you're going to be in LA, then you're going to fly back to Pittsburgh, and then you're going to fly to Dallas. That kind of stinks. We don't really have stretches like that. And even though it's home, the home games are early, and then we have a bunch of road games later on. A good number of those road games are AFC North opponents, which,
anything can happen.
And it's also close. You can drive to Cleveland. You can drive to Baltimore. You can drive, Cincinnati. They're not far. It's not like a real distance to travel. So to me, it's not bad.
Yeah. When you look, like, my kind of initial reaction on it was, of course, there's a bit of a gauntlet near the end, but if you can stack some wins earlier in the season, it makes it a little bit easier to come that couple weeks before playoff time. So the Steelers need to get off to a pretty decent start, I think, to start off the 2021 season. But of course, they got the Buffalo Bills in week 1. Do you like that matchup? Do you like getting it out of the way early, or what are your thoughts on the week 1 opponent?
Yeah, I think the Bills are a nasty matchup for us. I think they are a matchup problem for us. So getting them out of the way week 1, you take a loss in week 1 on the road, you can live with that and you can bounce back from it. And if you win that game, you're starting off good. Like that's a game that if you win that, you're going to have a good start to the season. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I love it. I think it'll be great. And it's always fun. It's always fun playing the Bills in Buffalo, especially. Also, I do like that we get them in September and not like December when Buffalo is at peak Buffalo.
Yeah, well, I guess we have Najee Harris now, but I'll never forget that Le'Veon Bell snow game. That was awesome when he just went off in Orchard Park or whatnot. I had a final exam that day for school, and I remember the clock getting close in the fourth quarter and like having to leave and being like, oh, I gotta go, but I don't want to miss this.
Yeah.
I didn't watch the entirety of the game, but I'll never forget it for that reason. It'll stick with me forever. But to get on to the 2021 game, I think Dave Schofield actually put it pretty well when it comes to the Steelers' 7th consecutive year starting on the road. That being the Steelers specifically asking to start the year on the road. Are you buying that, Geoffrey, or do the Steelers just have the worst scheduling luck ever when it comes to week 1?
Well, see, it made sense to me. And then Art Rooney came out and said, like, there's a quote of him saying that the Steelers are due for a home opener. Like, so I don't know. Like, if you wanted that, you could say something to Roger Goodell, the guy that, you and the other owners hire. Like, it often cracks me up how often owners seem to be like, we're not in charge of the NFL. And it's like, no, you really are in charge of the NFL. If you want a home game, get a home game. Like, it's almost like the media reaction and all the fans reacted being like, really? Another opening away from there? And he came out and was like, oh, NFL, give us a home game. I don't know. I don't have any conspiracy theories involving this at all. It's weird to me that you have the NFL giving us the 7th one. Everyone talks about it. And then, Art Rooney II comes out and is like, yeah, we're due for a home game. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess we'll see next year. I mean, 8 in a row would just be ridiculous. Like, it's a 50-50 shot. You're not flipping heads 10 times in a row, let alone 7 already. So I think there's probably some sort of smoke there that they probably asked for it. It just seems like a little unfortunate, I guess.
Either that or maybe other teams push for it. Plus, I mean, seriously, they know our ratings are going to be great.
That's true.
Pittsburgh's going to, and whatever game you put us in, people are going to travel to it because they want to see the first game of the season. It's weird to me that it is Buffalo, though, because you'd expect it to be someplace like, open at the Chargers. Why? So the Chargers can sell out their stadium. Like for their opening game. Look, the stadium's sold out. It's all black and yellow.
Speaking of the Chargers, this is something I wanted to get into just a tiny bit before we get into more Steelers or total stuff.
I know it's cool.
When it comes to the schedule release, man, some teams are really funny and witty, and like you got the Chargers setting the trend. They're like our opponents as Pop-Tarts, and it was pretty darn funny. Like, honestly, if you look at it, it gives you a good chuckle.
TikTok flavored Pop-Tarts.
Exactly. It was just it was good. Like, some real thought and effort went in that. And then you look at the Panthers and they come out with our opponents as Adam Sandler, and it's just a bunch of Adam Sandler pictures in different colors. Then you get the Steelers today, and they're like, here are our opponents as pierogies. And it's just like a very weird, strangely poorly cut and edited, just awkward, clunky video. And it's like, man, when did the Steelers become like this, like grandpa of social media? Just like, how do you do, fellow kids? You know, just like super weird. Like, what are your just impressions on the Steelers kind of releasing their schedule and how they kind of like don't fit in when it comes to the cool kids table, sports teams, and social media?
Yeah, my reaction to that was those pierogies looked absolutely disgusting. Like that was those were like painted. You can't dye pasta and get it that strong of a color. They like painted those things. Those are my thoughts as a person who eats way too many pierogies. Is those were painted or something. I don't know what they did to those pierogies, but that wasn't cool. First off, don't waste pierogies, right? Pierogies are serious. You know, Adam Sandler means whatever. Photoshopping Pop-Tarts. I don't care about photoshopping Pop-Tarts, but leave the pierogies alone, right? Be nice to the pierogies. Someone could have eaten those.
I get it.
And secondarily, you know, the Steelers are the least social media savvy team like out there. They really just are. They are that old school thing. Mike Tomlin probably doesn't even know half of the social media stuff. Like, he'd probably go to Juju and it's like, what are these guys talking about, Juju? Say it in old people terms. Like, I don't know. Like, they're pretty bad at it. Maybe if they knew what social media was, they would have known what Antonio Brown was doing when he was Facebook Living the locker room. You know, maybe like they're just not those team, and they're not concerned about it. They don't care. Like, their whole media team is more boring. Everything's more boring with the Steelers because they don't care. That's not what they care about.
Yeah, and you know what though? What's frustrating? It's like it's at their tip of their fingers. You just look across the hall, and there's Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool, and like you look at these young guys. To me, I'd be like, you know what? If I want an opinion on social media stuff, maybe we should go talk to them. They probably have a good idea or two. Or like, heck, you click over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. My email is readily available. I could like help produce some cool content. Well, whatever. They're like, no plug.
Michael Beck is open to being your social media director, Pittsburgh Steelers.
I mean, I wouldn't say no. But
oh man,
football stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this weekend, rookie minicamp, to completely jump right back onto these train tracks. But what are you looking forward to at this weekend? Obviously, you got the undrafted free agents. There won't be too much coverage. Still, this kind of COVID world, I guess it won't be as much as a normal year, but you'll get the rookies in, the undrafted guys in, the invite guys in. What are you kind of honed in on when these guys actually hit the practice field for the first time?
First off, I love that it's actually happening. Like, I cannot be happier. This is one of the best weekends. Just the reports you get out and the roster spots that change. Like, every time a rookie from a rookie camp invite gets a roster spot over someone else, I'm just like, that's one of my new favorite players. Like, they're just that guy that like came in, had zero chance to make a team, almost zero chance to make a team, and they grabbed it. You know, that's where we got Devlin Hodges. These are the guys I absolutely love. So I can't wait for that, and I'm really, really interested to see the cornerbacks. I know there's a lot of stuff on Shakur Brown, although a lot of people are putting a lot of hype into some of these undrafted guys. I really like what their 7th round pick looks like on film, what he showed in college. I think he is a scheme fit for the Steelers right off the bat. He has that kind of potential. And I really doubt any of them get serious playing time, right? There is room for that number 5 cornerback. You will get some time. You'll be on the roster. You will get to play. But I don't think they're going to play a major role unless someone gets hurt. But that's still right there. That's still right there. Cam Sutton goes down or Joe Hayden goes down for a couple of games. One of these guys is coming in there. So I'm very interested to see that position especially. And just to, man, have a football offseason actually happen it's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy. I haven't actually been through that. I started working at this site as being part of Behind the Steel Curtain. I started here right before the season in 2019. So like 2020, the off season is the off season that I've had, and that was just bizarro. So I'm looking forward to a good off season, an actual off season. Can't wait for it to start.
Oh, me too. Me too. It's been a long time coming, but finally getting there, it's really exciting. And like for me, I think some of the things I'm really looking forward to, like you said, the corners, that's a big one because I think there's still jobs up for grabs, regardless of being drafted or not. I really kind of want to see what Isaiah Loudermilk can do because Kevin Colbert even said he viewed him as someone they'd be comfortable taking in the 4th round. That's why they traded a 4th round pick for him. He said that on the Standard episode the Steelers uploaded. So when you're done checking this out, go give that a watch because it was very well put together. But he called him a 4th round pick. So I want to see him like actually come in and take care of business against fellow rookies and put together a nice little camp for himself because I think a lot of us want to be proved wrong with him. Outside of that, I think I'd also we know about the guys at the top. They'll be fine. But I think I also want to see how the punter does. You know it right away. It's a punter. You watch him. It's like, all right, that's what he's going to do in a game. So like I'm excited to see what happens there. It's just a change of pace to have someone that actually has potential at a position the Steelers have never had potential at before.
I was a huge fan when they signed Daniel Sepulveda, and we all know how that ended. Just tons of injuries, constant injuries. But this kid is the best punter we've had since there. The most potential we've had in a punter since Daniel Sepulveda. His hang time, his distance, his accuracy, love it. Love the guy.
So not to completely talk about punters for the rest of the show, but the draft class in general. Total it all up, undrafted guys, the invite guys. How many guys do you foresee actually making this team? Because last year is a bit of an anomaly because every single draft pick made this team, not just going to the practice squad. They made the 53. Geoffrey, what do you think of this entire draft class and how many guys can make this team?
Well, last year the draft class was 6 or 7 players.
I believe it was 6. I think it was 6. Yeah.
Okay, and then James Pierre also made the roster as a rookie. So they had 7 rookies last year. And this year we had 9 draft picks. And we've got some promising undrafted free agents. I think at least one of the last of the 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks don't make it. I think one of them just doesn't make it. And I do think I think an undrafted guy makes it, and I don't think he's on the Steelers yet. I think we're going to see a rookie minicamp guy make it. It's going to be interesting. It's hard to say too many because we've brought in a lot of decent, solid veteran guys to be backups because we don't want to have tons of rookies. So I'm going to go with 8 rookies making this team.
Yeah, I was going to say something along those lines too. Like you said, especially in the case of Isaiah Loudermilk, they kept 7 guys at a position they typically keep 6 last year. Then they traded up in a more valuable draft for a guy. So, like, to me, it's like, what are they doing at defensive line? Like, that raises some question marks.
They got a ton of defensive linemen.
Yeah, unless he's absolutely awful, he has to make the team. Otherwise, that's just brutal asset management. Yeah.
You paid a 4th round 2021 pick to cut a guy. That would be bad.
I guess crazier things have happened, but outside of kind of like those top 3 draft picks, of course, the center, running back, and the tight end that we spent most of today's show talking about, is there one guy that rounds out this draft class that you're like, okay, they're going to play a lot this year? And let's not get into the punter.
Well, that's the obvious one, yeah.
Of course.
No. I'm gonna go with no. There isn't a guy. Buddy Johnson, special teams. That's probably going to be your snap leader because I think he will be playing special teams a lot.
Do you think someone like Shakur Brown could end up being the nickel corner, or is that still maybe a bit lofty?
Well, I'm going to call it the number 3 corner because I agree the nickel and outside role can interchange because Sutton can literally play anywhere. Depending on what they want from that position, I think the number 3 guy going in is going to be James Pierre. So really for me, it's who can win the 4th cornerback spot. And that's going to be tough. I like the guy they signed who played for the Jets. He was really Malay. He was really solid in similar roles to what the Steelers need. But what stands out to me is both Malay and the guy they drafted in the 7th round, Trey Norwood. Both of them are not your Mike Hilton type of nickel. They play more like Cam Sutton did coming in and dime. They're more that kind of a player. So it's going to be very interesting to me to see where we go with that position. Like, are we even trying to replace Mike Hilton, or are we going to go a different ideology? Are we going to be like, hey, Mike Hilton was special. He's gone. We're going to do something different. So I am very interested to see what happens there, but I don't think any UDFA has a chance to take the number 3 corner spot.
Do you take anything in the fact that Mark Cavoli of The Athletic reported this, that Shakur Brown got the highest ever signing bonus for the Steelers for a rookie undrafted free agent ever? Does that mean anything to you?
Wow.
$25,000 signing bonus, which is the most, according to him, most ever.
Yeah. Wow. I had actually not heard that. That's crazy. But that is that moves him up the ladder. That moves him up the list and saying, you know what, that's a guy they really wanted. Obviously, they had Trey Norwood considered higher than him. But wow. Yeah, I mean, if they're bringing him in, then they've got a plan for him. They've got a plan for him to compete for some position. It's a pretty good one. And I bet he's in town already, has an apartment if he got a $25,000 signing bonus.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice chunk of change for an undrafted guy. I know teams across the league have spent a lot more. The Steelers, of course, we know how they do business. They're not going to open up their checkbooks for just anybody. So I think that does mean something. But I guess to round out the show, I think the one thing we also kind of got to keep in the back of our minds after rookie camp is over, if the Steelers don't fall in love with someone that they think could step in right away and be a primary backup, that's when they might go out and try to sign a free agent. Do you agree with that? Could they be in the market for someone, or is this the roster for training camp on what, July 23rd? I think it is.
They usually swap a few bodies for camp. If they're like, man, we see what you've got, bring in someone else, or someone's just not working, like they're either not putting the effort they want to see, so they get rid of them to send a message. But to bring in a real competitor for the roster at this point, I think you're waiting until cuts happen. Because I mean, when they have to cut down, it's a 53-man roster this year again, right?
Yeah.
So far, yeah. So the teams are right now at 90. Everyone's at 90. So you're done 32 teams cutting 37 players each. That's a lot of free. That's over 1,000, more players in free agency. So that's where I would expect them to add someone significant.
We got a super chat coming in here from Blake Literal. I hope I got that right. He puts $4.99 in the tip jar. He says, which new Steeler are you most excited to watch, not named Harris or Pat, and why? By the way, Big Ben for life. LOL, go Steelers. Thank you for that, Blake. Jeffrey, I'll let you answer that first. Who's your favorite new Steeler? Not named Najee Harris.
Well, before I answer that, I want to say, Big Ben for life, ride or die, man. That's the Steelers, and that's how we have to be. But for even more than Najee and Pat Freiermuth, I am excited for Kendrick Green. I love offensive linemen. I love his attitude. I want to see him get in there. I want to see him win the job next to Kevin Dotson, and I want to watch him and Kevin Dotson. I've said it before. Marquise Pouncey and Kevin Dotson were outstanding together. The two of those, they played so well off each other. And then Dotson was not nearly as good with Hassenauer in there, but the whole line wasn't at that point. I am excited to see Kendrick Green play, what he brings to the line in his personality. And I'm excited to see him line up with Kevin Dotson and just those two just be brutal to people. Because Kendrick Green, I gotta say, Kendrick Green was one of my favorite to watch is on inside zone plays where they get to double team someone and then work off of him. Kendrick Green's a monster on those. And Kevin Dotson is an absolute beast on those. I can't wait for those two.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. It's kind of a tough question. They didn't sign any big name free agents. It'd be very on brand for me to go with the punter, but
any new Canadians they signed?
No Canadians this year, which is an outrage. I'm furious about it, but
I am outraged.
I'll settle that in the most Canadian way ever by apologizing. But I am kind of excited to see what Quincy Roche can do. I think I got Geoffrey, but I think Roche could right now. If they don't add anyone, he's going to play some big minutes as a 6th round pick, which is crazy to think of. So he's someone I'm going to keep an eye on because right now he's probably going to have to play like 30 to 40% of the defensive snaps just based on rotation and rest.
That'd be the most play time since Vince. In 2013 was a 6th round pick who had to start. That'd be a lot.
Absolutely insane. And I noticed you did comment on that in Twitter today. I hadn't got back to you on it though, but I saw the side eye. But 6th round picks don't normally get that much that go time. So this could be the year once again, like 2013 or a couple years before that with the one Mr. 3rd and 5th. But whatever. Anyway.
Everyone will be rooting for him to beat out Cassius Marsh, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If he doesn't, we're in danger, and the Steelers not signing anyone is
at that point critical. They will be signing somebody. They'll be watching those cuts carefully.
So I guess with everything being said, Geoffrey, do you have anything new and exciting coming out for the people?
No, I think I've got I've got one last film room, and it is Quincy Roche coming out. I finished it a couple days ago. It should be coming out probably tomorrow. And outside of that, no, man. I actually am taking a little bit of a break this week. I'm doing a little less. Finally caught up with the draft, and we'll be hitting all the normal articles and everything next week.
Love it. So I guess with everything being said, I just want to remind everyone to make sure you're following Behind the Steel Curtain, clicking over to the website, behindthesteelcurtain.com. And, of course, if you're listening here on YouTube or on Facebook, you're not getting all of our great podcasting content. Make sure you're clicking over to wherever you get your traditional podcasts from, like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Pandora, you name it. We are on those streaming services. We got the AM shows running every weekday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. 3 of those shows are Let's Ride from Jeff Hartman. One of those is The Live Mike, belonging to myself. Just an awesome name pun. I love that one. But you also got the Steelers Stat Geek, which aired earlier today from Mr. Dave Schofield. So make sure you're clicking over and getting all of our content, because really, you're not getting this kind of content anywhere else when it comes to editorial or the audio stuff. Behind the Steel Curtain is pumping out tons of content for you. So make sure you're checking all that stuff out. For my co-host, Geoffrey Benedict, my name is Michael Beck. We will catch you guys next week.